get you to weigh in on what's happening down at the border, because the crisis continues there. President Obama on Friday urging Republicans, saying, look, this isn't theater. I'm not going down there for photo ops. What I want you to do, though, Congress, is pass this nearly $4 billion in aid so we can stop the chaos at the border. What do you say?
Well, after 6 years, he still doesn't understand the way that legislation is crafted. He has this idea that it's nonpartisan if he just throws something out and says, here it is, take it or leave it, my way or the highway. And he's given Republicans this ultimatum rather than really what I would call a proposal. There's no proposal here. What he's thrown out is, let's spend almost $4 billion and let's just accommodate the mistakes we've made. Let's go ahead and continue to make the same mistakes. When he goes to the Congress and says, let's do the most important thing, let's secure that border. Let's at least close the back door. And let's quit making fools of ourselves with our policies. Then I think he may be able to sit down with the Republicans and negotiate. But I think Republicans ought to say, Mr. President, when you're serious, when you're wanting to do something more than go and having a barbecue with some people for the cameras, then give us a call. But right now, you're not even being serious about dealing with a real serious issue.
If you take a look at where that money is going to, the $3.7 billion, so much of it is going to education, housing, health care, food, for
lawyers.
And lawyers, exactly, for legal help. Why the hesitance to fortify the border itself? And nobody doubts that the border wall in Israel has protected Israel.
It has changed the whole complexion. They went from having 1,000 suicide bombers a year to zero.
Exactly. And we paid for that large. I mean, U.S. dollars helped build that wall. And yet the same people who appropriated that money to build the wall in Israel are saying, well, it wouldn't work here. What is that?
Well, hasn't it already been appropriated here in the United States? That money 10 years ago was appropriated for a wall here in the United States. Where's that money? Why is there no wall?
Well, with all the slam, bang, whiz, bang technology that we have, that we are checking out your phone calls, between a physical fence and electronic monitoring and all different ways of monitoring that border, it is inexcusable for us to say there's nothing we can do. That is nonsense. By the way, Ernest District, former Oklahoma congressman, he did a survey. He found out that if he bought airline tickets for all these people that have come over illegally in the last few weeks, that you could save 99.5% of the cost that the president is suggesting, because $29.5 million would buy airline tickets to send everybody back home. And you'd get a lot of frequent flyer miles.
You could send them first class for $40 million. So,
well, and the point is that is less than 5% less, or 0.5% less than it's going to cost for the president's proposal, which is, let's just see what we can do to accommodate our failure.
I want to ask you something, because we were watching the news this week. Jesse Jackson speaking in Chicago, and he's saying we should take care of these kids. And as a minister, he feels sorry for these kids. But he says, what about the kids here in Chicago? What about our local kids? Let's listen to what he said.
I think getting support to those children in the humanitarian crisis is the morally right thing to do. The remedy and the resources are very important. I think even Glenn Beck sending food and water and clothing is the right thing. But there's also a crisis in Chicago. It's not either, it's both and. We cannot turn our backs on those children there. Not here in Inglewood, where 1,000 have been shot this year, 200 killed, several thousand in the last few years. To me, we need a comprehensive plan here at home as well. We have a crisis at home, and maybe it mirrors much of what's happening and rather abandon urban America.
See, Governor, from a faith-based perspective, you were a pastor, also Governor, and I wanted to ask you, how do we balance this, our Christian faith or whatever your faith might be, helping kids, but also, what about our kids here at home?
Well, America's a great country. We're not going to let these kids starve. We're not going to let them just, wither in disease. But the real question is, when people ask about the Christian responsibility, as a believer, it is my Christian duty to try to help people. But it is not my Christian duty to turn to the government and say, government, do what I should be doing. So, I think the question is, if churches, and they should, all denominations and faiths should be acting with charitable intent. But the government is not a charitable organization. I hate to be so blunt, but the purpose of government is to secure and protect the people of that nation. And then it's the purpose of that nation and its good-hearted people to do the charitable work. The reason that we are so screwed up in this country is because, frankly, a lot of believers have robbed God of a dime out of a dollar and never paid their tithes, so the widows and the orphans are being taken care of by the government, who does a really lousy job of it. And it should be that the charitable work is done by the churches, but the The security work ought to be done by the government. So the government ought to do what it ought to do and say, churches, we need your help down here on the border. That's what ought to be done.
I wanted to ask you something. Well, there's been a lot of comparisons to Katrina.
Yeah.
The response to Katrina. You, as governor of Arkansas, took in a lot of the refugees from Katrina.
75,000 in 3 days.
So what were some of the problems and hurdles that you faced dealing with that crisis at the time?
Well, it was an unbelievable avalanche of human people who came to us with literally the clothes on their back and nothing else. And one of the things that I decided early on, the worst thing we could do is to congregate them together. You saw these pictures of people congregated in the Superdome, then moved to the Astrodome in these massive locations. That's a huge mistake to make, because when you put people together, if one person gets sick, everyone around them starts getting sick, and now you've got a serious health issue on your hands. If one person gets in a fight, it can turn into a riot. Here's what I did. I called in all the faith groups. This was one of those moments where I said, look, I need every faith leader. I need every Boy Scout and Girl Scout camp leader. I brought them in. The camps had just closed for the season, but they hadn't been winterized, and I said, I need your camps. I want your church camps, your scout camps. We're going to bring people in. We'll cover it, but we need you to staff them. They had showers, they had beds, they had kitchens, they had playgrounds, they were self-contained. People weren't going to get in and bother them. They weren't going to get out and terrorize the community. They were spread all over the state. That way, no one community had to deal with the education, with the human services issues. No one county had to deal with all of the very complex problems that you were facing with people who didn't have an ID. They didn't have their kids enrolled in school. They didn't have any possessions, insurance card. They had nothing, and you had to basically create their identity from scratch. Spread that around. Don't try to concentrate it, because when you do, you're begging for problems in health and security and a dozen other ways.
Wow.
And it worked beautifully.
So smart. Really, really, really smart. Who's coming up the show today?
John Voight's going to be on our show tonight. I highly recommend watching it. When he was with us in 2010, he made some very strong, bold, provocative predictions about Barack Obama's administration. Well, they've come to be true. He'll be back on tonight. We also have Naftali Bennett from the Israeli government. He's the Minister of Economy. He'll be with us, giving us a first-hand insight into what's happening there. Dennis Michael Lynch has been on the border. We have some brand-new video from the border with him. It's going to be a very, very powerful show.
8 p.m. Eastern.
All right.
Governor, thanks a lot for
Governor.
coming.
Great to be with you.
Great to see you as always.